Where do babies come from?
Where do babies come from? Christian parents should be having this conversation about sex with their kids as the discipler of their children.
I try to stress to them, this is a beautiful,
Right.
good gift from God.
Yeah.
You can always ask mom or dad anything about this.
Can we just make this a short episode? Welcome to the We Can Talk About This podcast, conversations with Jonathan and Christa Thrallfall about ideas shaping us and the world we live in. And Christa, we got a big topic for today. Are you ready for this?
I'm excited.
Are you excited about it?
Yeah.
Okay. So we were talking about, you want to say it?
Where do babies come from?
Where do babies come from?
The birds and the bees.
Birds and the bees. Christa, where do babies come from? Can you tell me? Can we just make this a short episode?
God.
That's a good answer. Storks.
Yes.
The stork.
Yeah. So we have 4 kids, ages 7 through 14. We have had many conversations with them about where do babies come from.
Yeah. Especially you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, because, for the first several years of our kids' lives, I was homeschooling them. And so I was with them most of the time. So questions came up. So today we want to talk about what we've done.
Yeah.
But before we do that, we want to talk about why even talk with kids about sex.
Yeah.
Why should that be a conversation? Isn't that private?
Right.
And so why?
Well, I think also not only do we want to talk about why we think it's important, but also identify some reasons parents don't want to do it.
Yeah.
And they feel very uncomfortable with it. And I've talked with parents who this is like torturous to them. They'd rather, walk over broken glass than have a conversation with their kids. Even the idea of the capital T conversation, capital C, is, I think, misguided. Mm-hmm. And I think that a lot of parents are very uncomfortable with the topic, and they avoid it.
Yeah.
I think they may be uncomfortable with it probably because it's an area they personally feel conflicted about. I mean, there are many areas in our lives that we feel our own brokenness, and sexuality and sex is a big one. Mm-hmm. And it makes sense. If it's such a powerful, beautiful thing, then from a Christian worldview, of course the adversary is going to pervert it, distort it, make it in our minds, make us feel conflicted about it.
Yeah.
So I think that's one reason why parents, they avoid this topic with their children, and they don't want to talk about it.
Yeah. And you can probably think back to your own experience and maybe, the talk,
Right.
as you already mentioned, like, okay, putting that off until what age,
14.
12, 14, 16, So
Yeah.
let's jump into this.
Yeah.
What are some reasons that people might avoid it?
Well, I think, like I said, there's some personal discomfort with it. I think there's a lot in our culture that is constantly teaching us one way or the other that sex is more of a tool than a gift, more of something to be used for ourselves rather than something that God has given us to be used for His glory and our good. And that makes us feel conflicted about it. I think because, how many commercials or marketing techniques use people's bodies as a way just to get the eye's attention? Your eye, there's an instinctual reaction to be drawn toward exposed flesh, skin, and marketers know that, and they use it, and that's a fact.
Yeah.
And because of that, it can make it feel uncomfortable because it's been used as a tool instead of a gift. So that's one reason why it's important to have that conversation. Why we feel uncomfortable, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And going along with that, why it's important that our society, our world is constantly shaping us as adults and our kids as well.
Yeah.
It has an agenda that it keeps pushing and with everything, but especially with our bodies and with sex, that this is what sex is all about, that this is what it's for. And it's something just to enjoy or just to consume on your life.
Yeah, to consume or to use it as a way to boost yourself up. Like the prevalence of the word sexy, I think, has kind of confused everything. Um, as another reason why parents must talk with their kids about this, and we're going to talk about how a little bit later, is that we're supposed to teach our kids.
Yeah.
Like we are the ones God has put us into the position of being our children's mentors, teachers, encouragers, instructors. And why would we leave out this incredibly important aspect of life if we're the ones who are supposed to be teaching? Why let someone else do that?
Yeah.
Who loves them less, or in the worst case, actually desires their harm. Are we going to leave that to their peers? Are we going to leave that to our culture? No, we must teach them about sex. That's an absolute like rock solid conviction with me, and with you too.
Yeah.
That we are the ones to teach our children, and why would we then avoid this most important topic? I don't mean more important than other topics. I mean it's incredibly important. Is what I mean.
Yeah. And I think if we are viewing this as something that we have the talk with them as if it's like a one and done, or as if it's like being put off until like they're 13 or they're this age, most likely they've already encountered this information from some other source. And it's also probably not from the same vantage point that you, as hopefully a Christian parent, would present it from.
Yeah.
And so wouldn't you want your child, their first experience, to be from such a safe place from you as their parent who loves God and loves them and desires their flourishing. So that's kind of our heart behind why we want to talk with our kids about this, why we want to make it an ongoing conversation with them, and why we wanted to do a podcast episode on this, because I think there's a lot of different information about this. And so we just wanted to share what we've done and why we encourage others to do it.
So I think if we go back to the two reasons we've stressed as to why we should talk with our kids, why we believe any Christian parent should talk with their kids about sex, is because parents are the primary disciplers in the lives of their children, the primary teachers, and because absent of parents teaching, the world is going to teach them. They will be taught. They will get their answers somehow. And so that's a tremendous responsibility and an imperative. It's absolutely necessary. So, okay, there's the why. Should we move on to the how we've done this? Is that where we're going to go next? So,
I think even what has brought this question up.
Perfect. So even before talking about specifically how, like, what's brought the conversation up, right? Have we said, okay, sit down, we're going to have a lesson about sex with 3-year-olds? No, that's not typically how it's happened. So how has it happened for us, Christa?
A couple ways. One, children are curious. And so sometimes they will just ask questions. They'll see a baby. They'll think, how did that baby get here?
Yeah.
Even for our older kids, seeing their younger siblings being born. Okay, where do babies come from?
Right.
Does God give babies? Does the stork give the babies? Did the doctor somehow procure the babies? So just from our children's curiosity, that is one area that it's come up with. And it comes up at what I would call inconvenient times. It's never like it's just okay, here we have a whole Saturday afternoon, nothing else is going on, and let's bring up this topic. I remember a Sunday morning. This was maybe 6 years ago, and I texted you, okay, we just talked about sex around the breakfast table, with my 4 kids, because...
And all different ages, too.
All different ages, yes.
Different levels of comprehension.
Oh my, yes, yes. And so just talking, but a question came up. And at that point, I don't even remember what it was, but just children's curiosity. And then another thing that has prompted questions is reading through the Bible.
Yeah. So the questions that are asked, and then reading the Bible. This has been huge.
Huge.
Genesis 1 talks about male and female. Genesis 3, well, there's the fall in Genesis 3, but Genesis 4 is when people start procreating, and so that the conversations have begun then. In later on in Genesis, I mean, we haven't gotten through the first book of the Bible, and we all already have Abraham sleeping with his with Sarah's maidservant, Hagar. And I remember our kids asked about that. Wait, Abraham and Hagar weren't married, and yet Abraham goes into Hagar and she conceives and has a child, and they asked about that. So that led to conversations not just about sex, but about sex and marriage. And so the Bible reading, we have Proverbs. There may be some proverbs that you may wish to avoid when reading because they speak in anatomically correct terms about the delights of a spouse's body. And should you avoid that chapter? Should we avoid that chapter when we're reading with our kids?
Well, I guess it depends how much time you have. but even that, and like Song of Solomon, like for all four of our kids, now that they can all read, last year we had a Bible reading schedule for them, just starting in Genesis, and okay, let's read this together. Sometimes we read the Bible to our kids, sometimes they read it on their own, but we always want them to ask questions, just like we talked about in the Bible study episode, approaching Scripture with questions. What does this mean?
Yeah,
and sometimes that brings up more than just straight spiritual answers.
Right.
The other day, as Jonathan and I were talking about this episode, I mentioned that the other day one of our kids, straight from their Bible reading, said, "Mom, what does it mean for someone to spill semen on the ground?" And that's like in the few minutes before breakfast, before rushing out the door to school. We're having that conversation. And I'm grateful that this is something that we try to make an ongoing conversation, so that I didn't have to just brush that under the rug or okay, we'll talk about it when you're older, or, so Bible reading has brought this topic up a lot.
Yeah. And I think what better way for conversations about sex to come up than when you're reading God's word, because you're already thinking about this is what God has said, and we're going to talk about this a little later when we talk about how we emphasize these conversations, or what we emphasize in those conversations, and one of those is the goodness of God. That God has given us this book, and we can learn so much from it, and it prompts so many different conversations. I think too, rewinding just a little bit to why talk about this, when you look at how the Bible presents sex, sexuality, sexual appeal, beauty, the body, it's so cultural. Our culture is, on the one hand, very shy about sex in some respects, and the other hand, extremely overt about it.
Yes.
And it's like, but the Bible is just straightforward. There's no blushing. There's no snickering as if there's something dirty about it. It's just beautiful and yet at the same time appropriate and sacred. And I think reading about sex and in the context of God's holy word is what better way could there be for these topics to come up? And so I think that there's 2 points to be drawn out here. One is the importance of having a sex conversation with kids as they're able to process it, and the importance of reading the Bible with and to your kids and teaching them to read it as well. So those are the things that have prompted the curiosity, that is, the kids are asking questions, and then simply Bible reading. Okay, Can we talk about then how we've done this? So I should probably start by asking you, how has this come up for you with our kids? Probably starting from the early ages then.
Yeah, and I think this brings up, I already mentioned the kids' curiosity. And if you are a parent or you have had any dealings or workings with kids, you know that sometimes they ask just crazy questions. And sometimes the questions are like they really want to know the answers. And other times it might be a question that is quickly followed up with, "Can I have a snack?" So as a parent, it does take so much wisdom to know, like, okay, what context are they asking this question with? Are they ready to receive like a big, careful answer of, okay, God created a man, he created a woman, he made them differently, he made them to fit together. Like, are they ready to receive it even on just a small level, I would call that, where you're just kind of giving simple and basic things? Or are they 2 and they need to know, like, this baby came from God.
Mm-hmm.
Because some children are, that's the level that they're at, and then they're asking for animal crackers.
Yeah.
So I think it does take so much wisdom as a parent. And let me just say that we're not perfect. Obviously,
Oh,
I think you know that. but we're presenting this just as like imperfect parents who are in the trenches
yes.
and who are still having these conversations with
Yeah.
our kids and still needing wisdom, desperately
Yeah.
needing wisdom to know how to go about this.
Right.
But just the age appropriateness thing is a big deal. So as soon as it seemed like my kids are asking questions, they're really wanting to know the answers, I tried to give them the best answer I could for the level they were
Yes.
at.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and as they grow older, as their maturity has grown,
Mm-hmm.
I give them more.
Right. Yeah. I think another factor there is to consider is when we stress with our kid, when we talk about these things with our kids, like Krista just said, we want to be as specific as we can be at a level that's appropriate for that child.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And keeping in mind that that child doesn't have the may not have the filter or the discretion to know when in what circumstances it's appropriate to share the information you've shared with them.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't want something you've told them to suddenly be blabbed in a group setting, it's probably best to wait until they understand the principles of privacy and appropriateness. Like, this is something that we can talk about, but you don't talk about it with anyone else besides dad and mom. Like, those kinds of things need to be stressed as well. And that's
Yes.
what I think what you mean by you talk with them about it on a level they can grasp, including their ability to keep things private, to keep things appropriately stated.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And that is something each time I have talked with any of our kids about this, is that I try to stress to them this, first of all, this is a beautiful,
Right.
good gift from God.
Yeah.
This is not something that's shameful, but it is private.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so because it's private, you shouldn't talk with anyone else about this. You shouldn't talk with your friends. You shouldn't have anyone else talking with you about this. But you can always ask mom or dad anything about this. So I really, every time, just wanting to stress to them, this is a good gift from God.
Right.
It's beautiful. It is private.
Yes.
It's only for a man and a woman in the covenant of marriage.
Yeah.
Not something for you to talk with friends or talk with other people about, but always, always, always ask dad and mom any questions that you have about it.
Yeah. I think the stressing, bringing those various strands together at the same time.
Yeah.
The goodness of it. It's given by God. It's a good thing. You can't read the Bible and get any other impression that sex is a good gift from God. Beauty, physical appeal is a good gift from God. It's also very specific. The confines in which it can and should be enjoyed are very limited. And so you stress that this is just something for a husband and wife to enjoy. And talking with dad and mom about this is a safe thing. I would also stress this, that the kind of attitude or mood that we emanate when we talk about this communicates volumes to our kids.
Yeah.
So if we're tense or uncomfortable about it, if we're impatient about it, our kids quickly would get up the idea that, okay, this is not a conversation to have with dad and mom. I'm going to find some place else to learn about this. I'm going to find somebody else to talk about this because mom and dad don't feel comfortable talking about this.
Right.
So I don't think there's any other way to get around this than to be personally comfortable with it, because you can't project something you're not. And the older the kids get, the more they can pick up on nonverbal cues from the parents.
Yes.
So there's no shortcut to this. There's no formula for this. There's no, at this age, at this date, say these things, show them this, this from a book, whatever. No, it's really got to come from the heart, where the heart of the parent. Would you say so?
Yeah.
It's in terms of how you communicate it. Now, I think that there can be practical instructions on what you communicate, like Louise just said, stressing the goodness of it, the privacy of it. I think, as with anything, how we are doing spiritually is going to deeply affect how we go about this, including how to talk about sex with our kids.
Yeah. Going back to sex being a good gift from God, our culture does not present it like that.
Right.
It presents it just as a personal thing. And so that's even something we've talked with our kids about, that God gives so many good gifts, but we often try to like wrench them from the giver and just use them for our own purposes. So, I talked about body image a few weeks ago. So whether it's food or our bodies or money or our time, we always have the tendency to take these good gifts and separate them from God and just use them however we want.
Yeah.
And sex is not for that. Like, God has a very specific relationship and time that sex is for.
Yeah.
So we want even to approach that conversation with our kids, that this is a reflection on the goodness of God. But it's only to be used during this time.
Yeah. I think also we're constantly trying to point out, when it comes up, the difference between the way our culture, through whether movies or social media or the conversations they hear with people, the difference between our culture is going to present it and the way we're trying to present it. Because they may wonder, like, why did they use this word?
Yeah.
Like why was this supposed to be funny? Like, well, because they have this view of sex that we don't have.
Yeah.
And I think we're constantly trying to untangle the voices about sex. This sex is good, yes, but the way that they presented that was done in a way that makes it seem like sex is something to use for your own pleasure outside of marriage. Or sex is good, yes. Bodies are made beautiful by God, and God made us to be attracted by bodies. But that presentation of it is actually twisting that beauty into something other than what it's intended to be. So it's complicated because sin is complicated.
Yeah.
It's difficult because sin shatters everything. But as parents, we have to put the pieces together for our kids, and we have to show them the difference between a bad, perverted, self-centered representation of what sex is and what it's for, and a beautiful, God-centered presentation of what sex is and what it's for.
Yeah. Along with that, even just our kids will come to us with things that they'll hear their peers joke about, whether it's body
parts or
and just things that just terms, things that just get thrown around. And I think because we work to establish such conversations with them and have that, they still feel comfortable coming to us and telling us about those things. And I don't want to lose that.
Right.
Like, that is so important, and I think so helpful to be able to hear, okay, what are their peers saying? And just make that just like a regular thing, not something that we're shocked by, but just something we try to help them think through.
Yeah.
Okay, how can you respond to that?
Yeah. Christa, when did you start using the right, not the right, as if you used the wrong, but anatomical terms with our kids?
You
I didn't
know
even
what?
tell you. I didn't even say I
No.
was going to ask you this, but I think it's helpful to think about.
Right, it is helpful to think about, and it was old enough. I can't remember exact age, but
Would you say 5?
I think around
Five-ish?
5-ish.
Yeah.
But I tried to stress again that this is such a private thing, that this is a private word.
Yeah.
And so this is what it's called.
Mm-hmm.
This is what this body part is called, but no one else should be talking with you about this.
Yeah.
I wanted them to know what it was, but not to be shared broadly.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I think that's helpful to know. And something I think should be said too is that you might tell them something at age 5 and they'll forget it, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like,
Yes.
oh, we talked about this when you were 5. No, they forgot it. It wasn't that big of a deal to them at the time.
Yep.
They'll need to be taught again.
Yeah.
Which is why you always have to be ready, and you can't think of it in terms of, got the talk over, I'm done with this. No, you've got to be always ready to teach.
Yes.
Always ready to say it again. And not just again in the same way you told them when they were 5, but in a way that's increasingly appropriate to their age and their questions that they're asking.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes I found that conversations that I've had with them are a bigger deal to me than they are to them.
Yes, probably because we know far more detail than they do. So it seems a lot more vivid and shocking
Yeah.
to us. It's like, well, you're asking about that. Well, no, they're a kid. They're 5, right?
Right.
So don't freak out about it. Kind of get into their head. Remember what it was like when you were 5. Right. I mean,
and try to understand what they're asking as well. Like,
right. They may not be asking what you thought they were asking. But you have to, you have to understand, okay, what level are they on?
Yeah, that's good. Another thing that we try to be careful with our kids is what media influences we allow into our home, in terms of movies, music, books, and how is this talking about anything really, not just sex or people's bodies, but how is it presenting the world, and how does that conflict with how God presents the world? And I think that's really important because, like we already talked about, the world is always pushing an agenda. And what agenda are we allowing it to push in our own homes?
Yeah, definitely. I think that does influence the kind of movies we watch together. It influences the fact that we do watch movies together, because even if we don't watch, even if we watch a movie and there's something in it that's like, okay, at least we're there to interpret that for the kids and say, guys, did you notice what was going on here?
Yeah.
And I think that is far better than just giving them like, well, hopefully everything is PG-13 or better, and let them watch it. No. I want to be there with my kids, because it goes back to what we said at the beginning. God has given me the responsibility and Christa the responsibility to teach our kids, to mentor our kids, to even interpret for our kids what the world is trying to channel to them. But it does, the way that we value sex, the sacredness that God puts upon sex, does affect the media that we want our kids to be influenced by.
Yeah. It's such a big topic. This is just, I think God has given parents a responsibility to shepherd their kids. And it makes me desperate for God, desperate for his wisdom.
Right.
And I kind of think that's God's point.
Yeah.
Is that he wants us as parents to be desperate for wisdom, like to come to a place where like, I can't. And whether it's in talking with our kids about sex or their bodies or any other number of things, like we need God's help.
Right.
And so that's the end.
Yeah, right.
With this is
that's
that
the end of the matter, right?
It is, and that we need the Lord's help with parenting, with every single conversation we have with our kids.
Yeah, I think one thing to keep in mind is that there is no perfect conversation.
Yeah.
There's just a conversation, right? And we're going to do it imperfectly, but that's better than not doing it at all. And we have to realize, that didn't really go very smooth, but we're going to keep praying, and we're going to keep. And for us, the story's not over, right? I mean, our kids are still developing, and we are. Just you and I were still developing. Our story's not written completely yet. So we have to keep desperate and walking with the Lord. But I think that you're right. I think that is the key. We have to, as it were, stay on our knees and be desperate and humble and prayerful and in the Word. Because the minute we quit, we're going on a path, off the path in a direction we don't want to go. So it takes tremendous amount of wisdom. But we know where wisdom comes from. Wisdom comes from the Lord.
Yeah, and the Lord is the Redeemer.
Yeah.
He's the one who can work even in our failings and our flaws. Like you said, there's no perfect conversation, but God doesn't need perfect to work.
Right.
Because otherwise we wouldn't be able to be used.
Yes.
So anyway, that's, I think, something to take comfort and encouragement in, that God works through our failings and our flaws and for his glory. Yeah.
I think something we feel very strongly about is that parents should be having this conversation. Christian parents should be having this conversation about sex with their kids as the discipler of their children. So we hope this has been helpful to you, and we hope it's been encouraging to you, and hope you'll join us next time.
Thanks for joining us.